Today at the National Press Club, Chief Executive of Lynas Rare Earths, Amanda Lacaze. As a key producer of rare earth metals, Ms Lacaze will address the slow awakening of the West to the importance of these homegrown resources. Amanda Lacaze with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. My name's Tom Connell, I'm the club's president and also an anchor at Sky News Australia. Our guest today, Amanda Lacaze, CEO and Managing Director of Lynas Rare Earths. In case you haven't heard, Rare Earths going through a bit of a moment. I'm sure Amanda would say it's always been going through its moments, but we in the media in particular and the political class are beginning to actually take note. It's a good moment for today's address. Not only is this company, Lynas, the world's only commercial producer of separated light and heavy rare earth oxides outside of China, we also have an outgoing CEO. We know that means always time for honest conversations just between us and the national audience on television as well. Amanda was appointed CEO in June 2014 and led the company through a challenging turnaround to become an ASX 50 company. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from University of Queensland and a postgrad diploma of marketing from the Australian Graduate School of Management. Reminding our members and as well, the club will have a podcast of this address on our website later today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Amanda Lacaze.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon to everybody in the room. And also to those who are watching, and I have to tell you, I have a very large extended family. So for anyone at the ABC, the ratings will have improved today. I start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also recognise the traditional owners of the lands on which we operate in Western Australia. I would like to offer my welcome to the ministers, ambassadors, government and industry representatives who have joined us here today. In particular, thank you to our Resources Minister, Madeleine King. I am honoured you have taken the time out to listen to me. And thank you to Tom, Morris and the board of the National Press Club for inviting me to address you today. It is a privilege to be here. It is probably my last substantive address before I retire from my role at Lynas at the end of June, and I could not have thought of a better place to share my experiences of the rare earths industry. As I was thinking of this audience, I thought of a recent visit to our mine and processing sites in Western Australia by a large EU delegation. This delegation included an ambassador, various trade commissioners and diplomats from several member nations. And then I wondered, how many people in this room, a room full of national decision makers and reporters, have ever visited a mine? I won't ask you to put your hands up. But in Australia, we mine the periodic table from lithium to uranium. So there are plenty of mines from which to choose. Visiting even one mine will give you a different perspective as you meet the people who work there and who take great care in their work, whether they are geologists, metallurgists, environmental scientists, technicians, engineers, or our health and safety professionals. Australian mining generates great wealth which is shared with the whole nation via taxes and royalties and superannuation fund benefits. The taxes and royalties fund many of the services on which we all rely. And I just want to share the latest tax transparency report from the ATO reported that the resources sector paid more tax than all other industries combined. That is $48.5 billion in tax from resources, $47.2 billion from all other industries. And that tax paid by the resources industry is enough to fund total Medicare payments plus about half of the PBS. Mining companies also contributed $26.9 billion to state budgets through royalties. But to the highly populated southeast corner of this nation, we in the mining industry are largely invisible, although I have done my best to address that today. If mining is invisible in Australia, where our prosperity is so heavily reliant on the industry, is it any surprise that the issues associated with a relatively small group of minerals, rare earths, were underappreciated by governments until recently? Many consumers who love the finished products that use rare earths, most of you, despite the earlier request, still either have your mobile phone in your hand or very close by. It has 8 different rare earths in it. Or your electric vehicles, or even indeed just your internal combustion engine vehicles. People love these products. They have no idea of the raw materials required or the complexity associated in delivering them. I am old enough to remember the advertising program in the 1980s to convince children that milk and eggs didn't come from the supermarket, they came from a farm. Or as the Minerals Council puts it, before it was yours, it was mined. For those of us working in the critical minerals sector, there has been a shift in the 2020s. Critical minerals and rare earths have become more visible and are often in the headlines and not just on the business pages. Now, change management theory tells us that change occurs when there is a burning platform. Rare earths have prominence because of their importance in 21st century manufacturing, activities, jobs and economic development. Known as the vitamins of industry, they are essential ingredients in the technologies we use every day, like I said, cars, phones, electronics, and essential to our efforts to decarbonise as we seek electrification and renewable energy sources. But the spark that ignited the burning platform was a shift in geopolitics, which meant that China's dominance of this industry was no longer regarded as a benign matter. China dominates the industry at all stages of the supply chain. And I hasten to say this is not a challenge faced exclusively by rare earths. In fact, the supply and processing of rare earths is just one of many raw material sectors where China dominates. Of course, that allows China to act in ways that advantage China's economy and manufacturing industries, and consequently disadvantages others. And that has led to the supply of rare earths being a priority issue in the trade wars of the past year. Last year, China's ban on rare earths exports following the US government's Liberation Day tariffs resulted in the shutdown of automotive production lines in the US and the EU within 2 weeks. And of course, that led to various governments discovering rare earths. However, I can tell you the challenges for rare earths producers and the associated markets did not suddenly manifest in the last couple of years. Per my introduction, I am the CEO of Lynas Rare Earths. We are the Western Australian firm that in 2013 broke China's absolute monopoly on the extraction and processing of rare earth elements, and subsequently broke China's monopoly on producing separated heavy rare earths in May 2025. Supply chain challenges have been evident in this market every year of my tenure and also before. China's monopoly was established after 30 years of focused industrial development. It started with Deng Xiaoping's famous, oft-quoted declaration that the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. Of interest at that time, all rare earths processing was in the West. The development of the rare earth supply chain was one of the drivers of the economic miracle that lifted hundreds of millions of Chinese people from poverty. And as China developed resource extraction, then refining, functional material production, and ultimately finished goods production, at each stage generating new high-skilled jobs. And by 2010, all rare earths processing and many associated manufacturing jobs were, you picked it, insourced to China. An early example was the lighting industry. By the time phosphorus-based lighting technology was replaced with LED technology, 100% of lighting manufacture had moved to China. More recently, the Made in China 2025 policy included the objective that rare earths would only be exported in value-added form, at least as a magnet and preferably as a finished product. Last year, 50% of all EVs were manufactured in China, and that is the true measure of success of Chinese industrial policy. Of course, their domestic success was fortified by the Western commitment to globalisation, which advocated outsourcing manufacturing activity to the best fit location. Globalisation resulted in rapid outsourcing of manufacturing to East Asia and was embraced with alacrity by Western governments and consumers who quickly became addicted to cheap imports. In an age where we believed in the benefits of globalisation, China's dominance of rare earths mining and processing went unremarked. Even a decade ago, we still had great optimism that the rules-based global order would persist and strengthen. But that has changed. We have many examples of economic diplomacy, that's my diplomatic word, of the propensity of certain countries to use industrial policy to advance their own national interests. That's not remarkable. That is actually their jobs. But it is challenging for the rest of us. In our market, in 2010, following a dispute near the Senkaku Islands, the Chinese stopped supply of rare earth materials to Japanese industry. And this very small input got the attention of CEOs and politicians in Japan, the US and the EU. At that time, many industry observers believed it would be the burning platform for change, and many governments and industries did, I think, feel their feet get a little warmer. But the platform was not fully ablaze. Lynas and the US firm Molycorp were born out of that rare earths crisis. We had the best deposits of these materials at Mount Weld in Western Australia and Mountain Pass in California. But there was limited expertise on how to process the rare earths mined from those ore bodies. And guess what? The Chinese weren't going to share it. Not a big surprise. Times were very tough as we both struggled to develop process expertise whilst feeling the pressure of sustained low pricing from Chinese suppliers. Molycorp went bust in 2015 under a mountain of commercial debt. Lynas survived as our creditors, and I look at our Japanese ambassador Suzuki here today and say thank you, because the Japanese government maintained their support for Lynas. Lynas is actually proof that with the right assets and the right skills, it is possible to compete with China. And that was in an environment where there was limited government support, either policy or financial. Today, some days it seems that governments all over the world are racing to bestow largesse on even the most marginal of projects as they pursue their objective to develop resilient supply chains. However, I would suggest as the world attempts to rebuild broken supply chains, it is useful to consider the challenges faced and overcome by Lynas. Our experience shows that succeeding in this market is much more complex than simply throwing money at the problem. The ongoing support from our Japanese partners has been a crucial part of our success and is often referenced as governments seek to facilitate industry development. But it is important to properly explain our partnership, as it is so much more sophisticated than simply funding Lynas. This week, Prime Minister Albanese welcomed the Japanese Prime Minister, Her Excellency Sanae Takaichi. How wonderful is that? A woman leading Japan to Australia for her first official visit. This was the first visit to Australia by Japan's Prime Minister since Prime Minister Albanese welcomed Prime Minister Kishida to Perth in 2022. This was an exciting visit for many reasons, including providing an opportunity to showcase Japan's deep partnership with Lynas that started in 2011. It is significant that the Australia-Japan Joint Declaration on Economic Security Cooperation, I have a few of these government acronyms through the speech, spent quite a long time practicing them, by the two Prime Ministers elevated critical minerals to being a core pillar of our economic security relationship. Lynas is proud to have been recognised in this announcement as a flagship initiative symbolising collaboration between Japanese and Australian industry on critical minerals. Japan holds an important position for Australia, not just as a fabulous skiing destination, but I can assure you it is, or a wonderful place to enjoy Japanese and many other types of cuisine, and I can assure you it is. But Japanese is special to Australia because it is Australia's second largest export market after China, with exports of $65.1 billion in fiscal year 25. Our third largest import market after China and the United States. From a critical minerals perspective, Japan got the memo well before many other governments around the world. I've spoken about burning platforms, and our partnership with Japan was truly forged in fire. Recognising the importance of rare earth supply to Japanese industry in 2011, the Japanese government mobilised a multi-billion yen package dedicated to technical development and supply chain diversity. It was through this initiative that Japan invested in Lynas in 2011 via JARE, Japan Australia Rare Earths, a special purpose vehicle between JOGMEC, Japan Organisation for Metals and Energy Security, and Sojitz Corporation. Contrary to some of today's deals, JARE's financial contribution was relatively small at that time. By the time JARE lent $225 million to Lynas, over $1.3 billion of equity had been raised and spent on the Lynas project. Following JARE's loan, further debt in the form of a $225 million convertible bond was raised. We have enjoyed a very special partnership with both JOGMEC and Sojitz. When I became CEO in 2014, we faced existential threats from a continuing reshaping of the rare earths market following the earlier rare earths crisis, political challenges in Malaysia, and a Malaysian processing plant that frankly just did not work. We had limited knowledge on how to fix the plant, a broken balance sheet, little or nothing to sell, difficult relationships with our suppliers, and a shareholder register devoid of any institutional funds. My husband sometimes said, "Why did you take this job?" In fact, I got sick, and I speak to the journalist here, I got sick of reading about the beleaguered miner Lynas, or the most cutting was when we were described as a debt-ridden basket case. JARE's support during that time was financial, it was technical, and it was commercial. The financial support from JARE was crucial. However, whilst necessary, it could never be enough on its own. We had to learn to operate our assets, which we did with discipline and determination. That meant we had to develop our own intellectual property. I think in reflection, in 2015, our production was 100% not on time, 100% not on spec. Anyone involved in business would know that's not a great basis to do business. And so we could have easily packed up our bats and balls and gone home, because it was pretty tough. But that is not the Lynas way. We're fighters from our technicians right to our senior leadership. And by 2017, we had rehabilitated our balance sheet, hit and exceeded nameplate, and started the process of stepping up production. We have continued to invest in our business, primarily funded from equity capital markets and cash flow. We recently completed our Lynas 2025 program, a capital plan under which we invested $1.5 billion in our operations, 1.3 billion of which was in Western Australia. Today, our production capacity for our key product, NdPr, is double that of 2017. We have had new products in the form of separated heavy rare earths and new facilities at Kalgoorlie and upgraded facilities at Mount Weld and Kuantan. And then in 2025, a new set of geopolitical challenges arrived. A key announcement from the United States government in July 2025 was a comprehensive support package for MP Materials, the only other significant operating rare earths mine. This included a price protection agreement with a floor price for NdPr, which, if successful, would address China's use of pricing to control the market. Subsequently, we were proud to announce an updated 12-year availability and supply agreement with JARE, which builds on the success of our 15-year partnership and includes guaranteed offtake and floor prices for all key products. The updated supply agreement will ensure supply of these critical materials to Japanese industry, and the implementation of fair market pricing will support Lynas in continuing to grow and invest in our operations. We have also signed a Memorandum of Understanding to establish a framework for cooperation on mineral exploration. The evolution and richness of our relationship with our Japanese partners is an important lesson in policy development if new resilient supply chains are to be developed. If we want the independence and economic prosperity that downstream manufacturing brings, then it is helpful to reflect on the lessons from our 15-year experience. Lesson 1, processing is complex. Money alone will not guarantee success. China has maintained focus for 30 years, right? Not all that long ago, I was in Washington, and I said to someone about needing to have a long-term perspective, and they said, oh yes, we really are focused on the strategic long-term until the midterms. And unfortunately, this is often the case. In China, there is respect and value afforded to mining, processing and manufacturing industries. Engineering remains an aspirational job. By comparison, last year in the US, they graduated 35,000 lawyers and 350 mining engineers. In Australia, where we rely so heavily on mining, we face a similar challenge. Universities that used to graduate hundreds of mining engineers now graduate them in their tens. We do have a table of students from Canberra Grammar here today, and I want to encourage them all to be engineers, please. We need to change perceptions of mining to reflect the environmentally responsible, technically sophisticated industry that powers the Australian economy, to remind our young people this is a great place to work and we need their brains and their talent and their energy if we are to deal with some of these challenges. We recognise and value the support of our Resources Minister, Minister King, but we encourage all governments to be more active in advocating for the minerals industry as the source of so much of our sovereign wealth. Lesson number 2, partnerships matter and can facilitate success. China's current position as both supplier and consumer of rare earths is unique. Other markets are not fully integrated, so solutions will necessarily be different. And globalisation may be on life support, but that doesn't mean we have to do everything ourselves. Lynas is a perfect case study in the benefits of strong partnerships. Working together with our partners, we have been able to create a resilient supply chain, even in the face of threats. In our case, each partner brings best-in-class capability. Australian resource, geology and metallurgy, Malaysian manufacturing know-how and experience, and Japanese materials science, especially related to metals and magnets. Our business maintains our competitive cost position with China through that best-in-class mix. Government-to-government agreements, including trade agreements, can help to facilitate these partnerships. I've spoken of the value of our partnership with Japan. Another practical example is the Australian government's provision of work visas to our Malaysian staff with their unmatched skills and expertise so they can work at our plant in Kalgoorlie. Lesson number 3, firms must be able to compete. Right? This Grattan Institute not long ago made the comment that the problem is not governments picking winners, it's losers picking government. Right? And so ultimately, yeah, it's a great line, isn't it? Ultimately, businesses have to be able to compete. We have always been able to access equity capital markets because we have the resources, assets and capability and track record to succeed. It is true that China has manipulated price and we welcome government backing of price floors, but ultimately we must be able to compete. Governments can help by implementing policies that create sustained positive conditions for business success. This includes efficient permitting processes. Anyone from government want? No? Okay. Efficient permitting processes, supporting the development and delivery of cost-effective inputs, including energy, constructive tax settings, targeted education. In Malaysia, we operate in a heavy industrial park which delivers many cost benefits, and there are opportunities to improve shared infrastructure here in Australia which will be more valuable than one-off grants or loans or, worst of all, ongoing government subsidies. Lesson 4. The supply chain will not be fixed by supply-side policies only. No market is ever fixed from the supply side, and rare earths is no exception. With respect to demand, it is important to remember that Chinese customers overwhelmingly buy Chinese rare earths. To fix the market outside China customers have to choose outside China rare earths. Our Japanese customers have worked with us to develop our business and our processes. Without this, our business would not have flourished. Success in building a resilient outside supply chain will depend on customers in other consuming markets, particularly the EU and the US, changing their purchase decisions. Now, governments have various policy tools that can help with us. If you look at China, they use both tax and licensing structures to support their industry. Options available to other governments could include the provision of tax credits to magnet buyers or requirements to purchase from non-China supply chains. In the US, the Defence Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, that's another one of those acronyms, DFARS, is a set of regulations guiding procurement which includes restrictions on the acquisition of certain magnets, tantalum and tungsten from the 1st of January 2027. And that restriction includes the full supply chain. In the EU, the Critical Raw Materials Act is a response to the EU's reliance on imported critical minerals. Benchmarks under that Act include benchmarks on extraction, processing, recycling and diversity of supplying nations. In both cases, we are observing changed purchasing decisions so that consumers can comply with the regulations. And lesson 5 would be simply, you can't stand still. China's already 20 years ahead of us. That means we have to work harder, smarter and faster to catch up. And because I'm a good Aussie, I believe we can. Right. At Lynas, we are up for the task, and that's shown by our recently announced Towards 2030 strategy, and importantly, as I outlined earlier, our new agreements with Japan. The rare earths market is not for the faint-hearted. At Lynas, we have confidence, we have the skills, the IP, the experience and the people to be successful. But developing a larger and more vibrant ex-China supply chain will need more than Lynas. And doing that will require governments with intellectual discipline and the imagination to conceive what could be. I know it's not an adjective we often use for our politicians, but imagining how it could be better is going to be a really important part of this change process. Policy support from governments led by the US government in July last year, including the provision of price floors, has weakened China's price controls. And now China is switching to non-price controls, including limiting access to goods and services via its licensing regime. I have outlined some options to facilitate development of this industry, including investing in shared infrastructure, education, international partnerships and tax policy. However, Western governments may have to embrace some more interventionist thinking if they are going to address decades of underdevelopment. I leave Lynas at the end of June after 12 years. I have loved every day of my job at Lynas, even the tough ones. When I joined, our market capitalisation was a tad shy of 400 million. Today, it is nearly 19 billion. I am incredibly proud of what our team has achieved, both here in Australia and in Malaysia. Suffice to say, I cannot do justice to the sheer determination of our people, as we have not just survived, but we have flourished. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. The mining industry in all its forms is of great importance to Australia, and I am delighted today to have been able to provide a little more colour on our small part of that industry.
Thank you very much. I might start on lesson one. Good place to start, I suppose. But you mentioned perception of working in mining and the lack of graduates we're getting through. What do you think is the issue? I mean, I'm assuming it's not perception of money in terms of pay for mining jobs. It's usually pretty good, if I could say that. Is it reputation? Is it, you know, working for a big evil mining company, don't go and do that? Is it FIFO? What could actually change? Is it a cultural thing? What is that issue, do you think?
I think one of the big issues is actually familiarity. Because if you go to Western Australia, working in mining is a desirable job. Everybody in Western Australia understands it. It's why 5.5% of the workforce in Western Australia is in the top tax bracket, because it's such a strong industry and it pays well. But I think that we don't have the familiarity and the understanding of the opportunities that arise in other parts of the country. But I also do think that maybe not every, maybe some people still think about mining like it's, you know, coal mining in Pennsylvania in the late 19th century. And that is not what mining is. It is not a bunch of buffheads moving dirt around. It is a high-tech industry which offers opportunities for people in all sorts of different fields. Yes, we need mining engineers, but we also need health professionals and we also need environmental scientists, and it is a terrific opportunity. And I just think that it's not promoted sufficiently, particularly in the southeast corner.
And what, by politicians? You're saying that, sort of talking it up more, or
I think we in the mining, I think we in the mining industry try to promote it, but I think that having third-party endorsements, including by politicians, is helpful.
I think I've been to about a dozen mines over the years by politicians, so they do visit every now and then. The other thing you mentioned around firms being able to compete, you mentioned inputs like energy, water, utilities, tax settings and so on. What about labour costs, and particularly what might be on the horizon, unionising of mining workers in WA? Is that on your horizon? Are you concerned by it?
I think that we live in an affluent country, and our objective is always to ensure that everyone shares in that. I think as a company, our objective is always to ensure that both our people and our communities share in our prosperity. I don't think prosperity can ever be sustained if you have winners and losers. You actually need to have many winners. And I believe that in the mining industry, as I said, the average salary in the mining industry is about $155,000 a year. And I can tell you that we as leaders in the industry spend more time thinking about safety and health of our workforces than any other single issue. So I don't think our workers need organisation, because I think that we have the track record that demonstrates how well this industry works and how well we have worked with the people who work in the industry.
So if it happens anyway, do you see that as an investment risk?
I think that always my number one job as a leader is to engage with the people who work in our business. And so I think that the greatest benefit is by doing that and ensuring that we are all aligned on the same objective, which is the success of the business.
Go to the floor now, Ron Meisen from the AFR.
Thank you for your speech. I'm wondering if you could reflect on two things. The first one is there's a significant debate in recent times about the imposition of a windfall gas tax or additional taxes on gas exports. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on that in the context of the deep relationships that have been built between Australian businesses and overseas investors who might be concerned about that debate. Now, we're not expecting anything in the budget. Doesn't mean it's off the table for good, though. You, particularly obviously Japanese investors. Secondly, you referred to the need to have companies that are able to stand on their own 2 feet effectively, but also the need for a government that is significantly interventionist. Could you reflect on the Future Made in Australia agenda as it's being implemented? Is it hitting the right marks, do you think, or does it need to be more focused? And how far up the supply chain do you think we can actually get in Australia?
Okay. So, they told me that you were only allowed to ask one question. So now I have to think back to that first question. So I'm not an expert on gas. I say that as a starting point. However, I would say that as I observe much of the debate, many opinions have been based upon misinformation. And so the way that gas is taxed is, to my understanding, designed in a specific way which sees increasing returns over time for the government as the heavy investments have been returned to those who have made the investment. Otherwise, we will not get the investment in our gas industry, which we think is critical. I think the second point, which I would say to all governments, is that it's very easy for us, and I see this sometimes when I talk to our investors. Malaysia appears a little more exotic, and people ask me about sovereign risk, and I say that there is sovereign risk in every government in the world, and when there is sovereign risk, it has the potential to reduce investment. And so decisions which may be perceived as, sort of highlighting sovereign risk in Australia should be ones which are taken very carefully.
And on the Future Made in Australia agenda?
Yes, I actually did remember the second part of the question. I think that this is still an evolving area in terms of policy with this government. Unfortunately, I am old enough to remember being taught in school that we were the Earth's farm and quarry, and that we really needed to do something about that. And now, more years on than I care to acknowledge, with a school reunion coming up shortly, we are still very much doing the quarry and the farm, you know, and I think I worked in agriculture at one stage, and it was, couldn't we at least scour our own wool? So I think we do need to be targeted. With many of these sorts of things, one success leads to another. So I think being targeted and finding an area where we can be successful will be excellent. But I think that I will not be the first person to say to you that without reliable, cheap energy, rebuilding a manufacturing industry is not going to be possible.
Next question, Corey McLeod for Innovation Oz.
Thank you very much for your address. This is a connected question. It's not two separate questions. In March, the federal government announced a $53 million CMCI CRC, which, as we're talking about industrial policy, a collaborative research centre bringing together industry research to unlock capability in critical mineral processing. First of all, from a commercial perspective, any advice in terms of as that CRC takes shape? And secondly, one of the pillars and one of the focuses is about sustainability, which I know is something that comes up regularly from a processing perspective. And I know that Lynas has had its first-hand experience with some of those discussions.
Can I take the second part of the question first? So in terms of sustainability, Lynas and every single one of our processing facilities has been designed from the bottom up to be sustainable. There is not a single CapEx proposal that goes through our organisation without there being there's an area which actually speaks to greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. And so we don't even approve the capital expenditure without clarity on those matters. We have just, via a partnership, put in a $300 million hybrid renewable power station at our Mount Weld operations. And in the last quarter, 95% of the energy that we used in our mine was from renewable sources. So we care about it. But one of the myths that I hear quite often is, oh, processing rare earths is a dirty business. You know what? Every industrial process in the world creates residues. And you can choose as an operator to manage that business safely, or you can choose not to, right? We choose to manage it safely. So we don't have toxic chemicals in our process. We don't have any discharge into the surrounding environment unless those residues have been properly treated and are properly stored. And so sustainability is absolutely possible within every segment, frankly, but certainly within ours. In terms of the sharing of via a CRC of knowledge about processing minerals, it is one of the areas that I've thought about quite a lot, because if, for example, Lynas was in China, we would be tapped on the shoulder as the lead operator in the industry, and we would have certain expectations around our investment and leadership with respect to the overall industry. And in fact, Northern Rare Earths in Baotou is fully integrated from mine to high performance motor. We don't really have the incentive to do that in Australia. In fact, we have an incentive to hold our IP close. And so I think that getting CRCs to really perform the purpose that people of the intention requires a little more around sort of whole of industry benefits to really get the full benefit of the CRC development.
Thank you very much.
Next question, Will Glasgow from The Australian.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the address. You spoke in your speech about the richness of the relationship Lynas has with Japan and the Japanese government. Can you compare the relationship Lynas has had during your 12 years with the Japanese government and its relationship with the Australian government in that same 12 years?
It's a really interesting question, Will, because it really goes to what I was saying about China is unique because it is a producing and a consuming country. So our relationship with the Australian government is really about our place as a producer. And, you know, so working, and we've been very fortunate as part of our Lynas 2025 program, both our Kalgoorlie facility and our expansion at Mount Weld were granted major project status, which meant that we had access to additional help and support to curate those projects through permitting and approvals, both federally and also in the state. So I think that we have a very strong and productive relationship both with the Commonwealth and the state government. But it is a different relationship fundamentally from the one that we have with the Japanese, which is really about us as a supplier and working with our customers there.
Maybe just to follow up, and I guess with the eyes on the budget coming up, is there something more direct? Obviously, there are different relationships, yours with the Japanese government and the Australian, but is there anything you'd really like the Australian government to learn from the Japanese government on this? Japan was, as you said, learnt this lesson about China's dominance in the industry earlier than others, perhaps because of the Senkaku dispute.
So we have a number of the key government stakeholders represented in the room today. So we have the US and Japan and the EU and Australia. You know, increasingly Korea is an important stakeholder, and so is India. But to all of those stakeholders, I would say that one of the most substantive initiatives in the last year was the US government's implementation of a price floor. And our objective on this would be if all governments, and there's at least two others in the room other than the two that have done it to date, were to implement a price floor that matched that, then our expectation would be that no government will ever have to write a cheque, because the price as it has been manipulated and is unsustainably low, which is why other projects have not been able to come to market. If the price sits at the price floor level, which is $110 a kilo, then economic projects can come to market and the industry can grow and flourish. And if every government backs the industry with that sort of support, then there is no longer any value from, say, for example, China undercutting those prices. So we would say that there is an opportunity for governments other than the US and Japan to come to the party with similar initiatives.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.
Next question, Masako Ozaki from Kyodo News.
Hi, I'm Masako Ozaki from Kyodo News from Japan. Thank you for this speech. I wanted to ask you, as you mentioned, the Australian government and the Japanese government just announced a joint statement about the importance of critical minerals, and I think in it they recognize Lynas' rare earth project as one of the strategic key projects to help diversify supply chains. You mentioned in your speech that funding alone is not enough, and that partnerships and tax systems are all important. But I think in the statement it mentions that both sides will help, will further invest and make further investments and grants. So if you were to kind of request something else from both governments, what would that one thing be? And also, just one more. As the sole producer, commercial producer of light and heavy rare earths outside of China, could you share with us what challenges or what pressures Lynas or Lynas Malaysia might be facing from China?
Maybe the best way to answer the first question is actually to provide a little more colour around the non-financial value that we've had in our relationship with JARE. In 2015, when our business was in a lot of trouble, yes, the financial relationship mattered, but I can tell you that the representatives from JOGMEC visited our plant 6 times that year to work with us, to understand what was going on, and dispatched a number of technical experts to work with our team as well. when we undertook our most recent exploration program at Mount Weld, we worked on that together, and in fact we had a senior Japanese geologist and a junior one and a metallurgist work in our team, alongside our team, on doing that exploration program. So adding those skills and capabilities to our own skills and capabilities allowed us to do a better job. So when I talk about non-financial engagement, these are some of the areas. With our Japanese customers, when we were making that off-spec product, they would send their technical people to the plant. We would make sure that we had our methods in the laboratory aligned and those sorts of things. So all of those areas are incredibly important to us. Financially, Sojitz has been our sales agents in Japan and engages strongly and positively with Japanese industry. So is there any one thing? Well, I guess I would just like the relationship to persist, because I think it is in the interests of both parties. The second point is it's more difficult to respond to factually, right? I think that over our time in the rare earths industry, we have had many events where we have seen that there may be motivation for positions vis-a-vis Lynas, which maybe had a particular source. There was one in particular in 2019, I think it was, which was reported, where one of the cybersecurity firms in the US identified that there was a social media program being run against Lynas, and that originated out of China. So we do see some of the rhetoric and some of that sort of agitation, and I think that many people see that. We talk about, you know, sort of political interference and otherwise can come from places where, you know, they may have other objectives other than just general prosperity. And certainly in the year since Liberation Day tariffs, I think that we have seen significant tightening of many areas as far as Japan is concerned, as China is concerned, including in the provision of goods and services.
Can I just add one more?
We've really got to move. We've got a few.
A really quick one.
Question in remotely from Melanie Burton, so from Reuters, who couldn't make it. She asked, does Lynas think there is a risk that government stockpiles around the world could distort rare earth markets, or Australia or stockpiler countries could be left with metal they can't sell?
Actually, no, because I don't think, I'm pretty alert to how much rare earths are sitting in stockpiles around the world right now, and it's not very much.
Short and sharp. Gemma Daly.
Thanks for the speech. Prime Minister, just before this address, announced a substantial package for fuel in terms of fuel reserve and the consumption. So I think a lot of people are pretty focused on their household fuel supplies, petrol, etc. But I wonder if you can reflect from a business perspective of the kind of impact it's having on you, and what that means in terms of what you've had to do to kind of try and deal with the problem.
Very fortunately, we have an excellent supply chain and logistics team who have actually taken on this challenge. So with fuel specifically, one of the benefits of having our renewable power station is that our consumption of diesel on our remote site now is limited to vehicles. And so that means that the cost impact of the price going up is somewhat reduced. maybe the most significant area for us as we look to manage our way through this is the increase in price for certain materials which come from petrochemicals, for example, sulfuric acid. And so at present we don't see there being a supply shortage, but we certainly see there being a price effect. And so we are responding to that by actually asking our technical team to continue to work on improving the way that we utilise those materials so we can use less as we go forward.
Thanks.
Notwithstanding the recent power outages you had, any reflection on them and addressing them?
In Kalgoorlie, we are pleased that Western Power has been quite responsive since that time, and we have been able to find a couple of areas where maybe we were contributing to a reduction in power reliability. However, I think that even the Western Australian government accepts that this is not going to be fully resolved until 2029, so we continue to look at alternate mechanisms to ensure we have reliable power.
Nick Stewart from Ability News.
You finished Corrie McLeod's question by talking about the need to reform CRCs. What sort of changes do we require? And secondly, you've brought a lot of processing onshore. What are the further, so that we're not just digging and exporting minerals, what further requirement is there to process here in Australia? What's the next step?
So our facility at Kalgoorlie has been built such that we can add additional capability there, right? We cannot even conceive of doing that until we have reliable, low-cost power. Once we do, then we can actually think about a chlor-alkali plant, we can put in solvent extraction capability, we can do all sorts of things. But
Will
the
you
first
become
step
a power
is power.
supplier? You do already.
It's not our core business. What we know and are good at is processing rare earths, mining and processing rare earths. However, having said that, I think Kalgoorlie is a perfect example of where a behind-the-meter solution which serves all of the industry in Kalgoorlie is potentially an excellent solution.
And CRCs?
CRCs, I'm not sure that I'm sufficiently informed to be able to answer that intelligently. Thank you.
Always good to be honest. There was one thing I was going to ask you about, actually, the final lesson. It mentioned about being more interventionist, which piqued my interest. Examples of that?
Oh, I think that things like the price floor that we were talking about previously would be one of those examples. Maybe facilitating, as I said, off-grid power and, sort of working with each of the different industrial organisations in the area to be able to make that work would be another example. So I'm not talking about going in and manipulation, but I'm just saying that in many cases, particularly outside Asian markets, it's really sort of a really very much hands-off approach. And I'm just saying that in some of those areas, governments could be more hands-on.
Okay. Now, I know you want the next generation to get involved in the
I
mining
do.
industry. Maybe we've got an example here. Max Noddle from Canberra Grammar School.
Thank you. I'd like to extend both mine and Canberra Grammar School's gratitude for this opportunity, both for the speech and to attend the press club. I was just wondering that you mentioned earlier the European Union's rare earth minerals policy, and I wasn't quite sure what that was. Could you please provide some examples and say how Australia can get an advantage there?
So the EU has actually set a number of benchmarks to be met by 2030. So that, if my memory serves me correctly, it's about 10% of raw materials need to come from the EU, 30% of processing needs to come from there, 40% of magnets, and that no more than 60% can come from a single country. And so, sorry?
Unless we have a strategic partnership.
Unless this is His Excellency the Ambassador of the EU.
We don't have a microphone for him. Yes, for those watching home, that's the EU ambassador just chiming in.
Yes. So this is about putting in controls to actually encourage local investment, and we are seeing that happen.
Thank you.
So that student getting a business card from the EU ambassador as well. It's been a big day. Edelyn Roldan from Canberra Grammar School is next.
Again, thank you for that great address. I want to clarify, how does the rare earth industry ensure that Indigenous peoples of the Western region genuinely benefit from the Lynas operations in Australia?
Thank you. That is a really excellent question, and one which we all hold very dear. It is really important that, as I said, for us to prosper, our local communities need to prosper as well. Our Mount Weld mine is close to Laverton. Laverton has about 300 permanent residents, about 80% of whom are Indigenous. We've made a deliberate decision to have our mine camp in Laverton, which means that our people actually engage with the local community, and that I think is really important. We contribute to things like the sports club. It's a daily activity. You know, we are engaged in that sort of area. You know, we sponsor things like the Women's Refuge. We do simple, practical things like we have a twice-weekly charter that flies out from Perth. We bring mattresses and clothing and all of those sorts of things out, which are important. Our mining contractor is Australia's first Indigenous-owned business, Carey Mining. With that as well, we increase the amount of Indigenous employment within our organisation. And then finally, of course, we work and we have a social and heritage plan for working. It's another one of those acronyms, SHIMP, and we engage with that with our local Indigenous people who come and do cultural training for our people, so that we understand each other, because when you understand each other, everything gets better.
Steve Lewis, a director here at the Press Club.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and I'm living proof that we do support generational diversity at the Press Club. Thank you. That was a really punchy political speech, appropriate for Canberra. I've not heard a critique of China since I had breakfast with my good friend Chris Hillman. It was a very tough speech. I want to ask you about China, because you're very critical of China's dominance, of its stranglehold, if you like, in rare earths. What can be done to counter China? Should, for instance, Japan be admitted to the Five Eyes intelligence network and become Six Eyes? Do you think that would be a good thing? We've got Minister King here, who will no doubt endorse these remarks. And what can be done to counter China's dominance? Do you think there is a real risk that it will will continue to have a stranglehold on rare earths unless countries like Canada, Japan, Australia actually work much closer together in a geopolitical sense?
Notwithstanding my analysis of China's position, I recognise that China is there by dint of their own foresight and hard work, right? And didn't do any of it in secret.
But it doesn't play fair. That's your bottom line.
That's what they told the West, and the West said, OK. So my own view on this, without being too glib, is that we need to see to our own actions, not to worry about somebody else's. You know, I say this to our people in the business who want to spend their time talking to me about competitors. The day that you start to play rugby when you're actually an AFL team is the day you lose, right? So what we need to do is to look to ourselves, make ourselves successful and compelling, and ensure that customers want to buy from us, because ultimately that's what makes us successful.
We're only a few days from the budget, and I couldn't help but notice the dramatic pause you gave when you mentioned efficient permitting processes. We in the media just call that red tape. You've got a wish list. We've got the minister here. She'll pop up to Jim Chalmers after we're done, and maybe just a few last-minute additions. What are some simple things that would make the next things easier for Lynas or the next Lynas in Australia?
Certainly, permitting processes. I think some of the initiatives which are being considered at present, particularly around aligning state and Commonwealth processes, are really important and very valuable. And once again, I actually do say to our people, the permitting process will be simpler if we do our work well in the first instance. And so that is really important, that organisations understand what can we do well, but as well as that, what we don't like is when we get stuck in what is affectionately termed junior officer hell, which is where people can say no but cannot say yes. And so this is where things like getting the major project status or the lead agency status in Western Australia really does help. So if that can be done for some projects, it would be best if it could be done for all. And as I said, aligning the state and Commonwealth processes is incredibly important, because I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to have a project which is fully approved by one of those governments, but then the other one gets, creates problems.
It's a big moment for rare earths, but you've been there from the start and been in the trenches, so it's been fascinating to get your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Amanda Lacaze.